spoke earlier about the two necessary virtues to disagree like a Christian, and those two virtues are love and wisdom. I think we see both of those virtues clearly displayed for us in 1 Corinthians 8. In 1 Corinthians 8, we get Paul responding to a problem in the Corinthian church that was causing divisions. That specific problem in Corinthians was the disagreement the church was having over whether or not it was permissible to eat food that had been offered to a pagan idol. In the first century, you could get food at a discounted price if you went to a pagan temple and you got some of the meat that was left over from their sacrifices. Some Christians felt like this was fine to eat because they knew that there was only one true God and these pagans weren't actually worshiping Zeus or Hermes or Ares, but the meat was fine to eat. Other Christians, particularly Christians who had been saved out of paganism, felt like this was absolutely wrong to do. So this is leading to serious tension in the church. You see, this doesn't seem like a small matter. There's some people in the church think that other people in the church are participating in a pagan ritual. So how does Paul wade into this? Well, I think he demonstrates love and wisdom. Love and wisdom. We look at verses 1 through 3, and here's what Paul says. Now, concerning food offered to idols, we know that all of us possess knowledge. This knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. If anyone imagines that he knows something, he does not yet know as he ought to know. But if anyone loves God, he is known by God. So the danger that Paul is pointing out is that there is a knowledge that certain Christians in this church have, that he endorses, actually, later in verses 4 through 6. The knowledge that there is no such thing as pagan gods. That there are no, idols are no real gods. And that's actually true. But Paul is warning that this knowledge that Christians have is actually leading to arrogance. There's an arrogance they have that's puffing them up, and they are not operating out of love. Back in Romans 14, Paul exhorted the church in verse 15 that they need to walk in love in these matters of disagreement. So when we're thinking about how we disagree as Christians, the danger we have is that we can be right, we can have knowledge, but that can lead to an inflated ego that will lead us to a cockiness and arrogance and dismissiveness, and it will not actually build up the church, but it will lead to division in the church. So we need love, and love, Paul shows us what love looks like in the rest of this chapter. Love looks like prioritizing the needs of your brother over your own comforts. In verses 7 all the way through 13, we see different ways that love works in the church. First, love recognizes our brother's weaknesses. In verse 7, after Paul has just explained that the strong Christians in the church are right, their knowledge is correct, he then says, however, not all possess this knowledge, but some, through former association with idols, eat food as really offered to an idol, and their conscience, being weak, is defiled. And so if we're walking in love, we're going to recognize where our brothers and sisters are weak, what their past has done to them maybe, and how that has led them to have the certain convictions they have. So we need to know about their weaknesses. And love not only recognizes our brother's weaknesses, it then prioritizes our brother's needs over our own comforts. Paul, he says shocking things here. Look at verse 9. Take care that this right of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. For if anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, will he not be encouraged, if his conscience is weak, to eat food offered to idols? And so by your knowledge, this weak person is destroyed, the brother for whom Christ died. And look what he concludes in verse 13. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. Wow, what a remarkable sacrifice Paul is willing to make. If eating meat, which is not sinful, there's nothing wrong with eating meat, but if that causes my brother in the church to stumble, well, the answer is simple. I don't eat meat. That's amazing. And friends, look at verse 12. This is so critical. You can sin with something that is not sinful. Draw your attention one more time to that. You can sin with something that is not sinful. Look at verse 12. Thus, sinning against your brothers and wounding their conscience when it is weak, you sin against Christ. Paul is saying that if you are eating meat offered to idols and it causes your brother to defile their conscience, you're sinning. You can sin with something that is not inherently sinful, but if by your participation, your activity in it, it leads these other people who have weak consciences in your church to follow your example and then defile their conscience, well, now you are responsible. You are sinning. My friends, I know that this cuts against the grain so much of our kind of American ideal of liberty, that I'm responsible for myself, and if I have the right to do something, I should take advantage of it. But Paul doesn't seem to define Christian maturity that way. Christian maturity is not defined by taking advantage of as many rights as possible as you have. But Christian maturity is looking horizontally at all of the people around you and seeing how your actions influence and impact them. That thing that you post on social media, that comment you make in the conversation, the drink you order at the restaurant, the movie you go to, everything we do, we have to think about our brothers and sisters. And friends, this is no different than what Jesus taught. In the Gospel of Matthew, when Jesus' disciples were asking if they could be seated with him on his throne in glory, here's what Jesus responds in verse 25. But Jesus called them to him and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave. Even as the Son of Man came, not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." If anyone deserved to take advantage of their rights, to prioritize their own needs, it was Jesus. He has the most rights given to him. He's God. But if Jesus can set aside his rights and make himself a servant, a slave, to the point of death, then we can follow in his path and lay down our rights for the good of our brothers. That's love.